Some men can't sleep because of guilt. Others because someone took the only peace they'd ever known. And then there was Damien Corsetti, who hadn't slept more than 40 minutes at a stretch in 8 months, not since the night they buried his wife. The diner on Ashland Avenue didn't have a name worth remembering. Its sign read Sal's in letters that had been red once, faded now to the color of old blood, and the fluorescent tubes above the counter buzzed with the particular frequency of a business that existed to feed people who had nowhere better to be. 11 p.m. on a Thursday. 3 booths occupied, the grill exhaling grease into air that tasted like reheated coffee and someone's expired ambitions. Vera Sinclair moved through the narrow aisle between counter and kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible. One hand supported the small of her back. The other balanced a tray of club sandwiches destined for the 2 truck drivers in booth, for who hadn't looked up from their phones since they sat down. 8 months. That was how long she'd been dead. 8 months since Damien Corsetti had stood over what he believed was her body in a warehouse fire. 8 months since his cousin Nico had engineered the perfect disappearance. Forged evidence, a planted bomb, a corpse charred beyond recognition wearing her jewelry. 8 months of living under a false name in the kind of neighborhood where nobody asked questions because everyone had secrets worth keeping. Table 2 needs water, Jerry called from the kitchen window, his voice the texture of gravel and menthol cigarettes. Vera nodded. Her dark hair, which had once been styled in the elegant waves that graced charity galas and society dinners, now hung in a simple ponytail. The designer dresses that used to whisper against her skin were replaced by a polyblend uniform that stretched across 7.5 months of pregnancy. No makeup. No jewelry except a $9 gold band from a pawnshop, purchased to ward off the kind of questions that led to other questions. She set the sandwiches down. The family of 4 barely glanced at her. That was what she had perfected, the art of being overlooked. The front door opened. November air came through first, exhaust, frozen gutter water, the metallic edge of approaching snow. Then the man. Damien Corsetti filled doorways the way certain men fill rooms. Not by trying, but by being incapable of anything less. 6'3". Shoulders that belonged under a different century's armor. Dark hair pushed back from a face that held the architecture of old Italian money and the wear of 8 months without sleep. His suit cost more than Vera made in a season. His eyes, the color of frozen lake water, scanned the room the way they always had, cataloging exits, threats, and opportunities in a single sweep that looked casual and was not. A woman stood beside him. Blonde, tall, immaculate. Diamonds at her ears catching the cheap diner light and making it embarrassed to exist. Her hand rested on his forearm with the particular confidence of ownership. Catalina Giordano. His fiancée. Vera had learned about the engagement 3 weeks ago, from a newspaper someone left behind in a laundromat dryer. Damien Corsetti to wed Catalina Giordano in spring ceremony. The alliance that would merge 2 of Chicago's most powerful families in the aftermath of his wife's tragic death. Her hand found her belly. Beneath the uniform their son rolled, restless, insistent, as though he could sense his father 20 feet away through stained polyester and 8 months of silence. Move! The command screamed through her nervous system. But her legs had stopped receiving instructions. She stood with a water pitcher in one hand, watching Crystal, the 19-year-old hostess, grab menus without looking up from her phone and lead the party toward Booth 2. Booth 2. Her section. Jerry. Her voice came out compressed, airless. I need someone to cover too. Can't. Jenny called in sick. Crystal's useless. Jerry didn't look up from the grill. Tips are good tonight, kid. You need the money. He wasn't cruel. He was practical. He knew about the baby, the absent father, the cash-only lifestyle of a woman who never discussed her past. What he didn't know was that the man sitting at Booth 2 had once owned half of Chicago's underworld. That he'd killed men for far less than the betrayal he believed Vera had committed. That if he recognized her, this diner would stop being a restaurant and start being a crime scene. Right. She picked up the water pitcher. Her fingers were white against the metal. I've got it. The walk to Booth 2 took 11 seconds. Each one felt surgical. Head down. Pour water. Get out. He's focused on his fiancée. He won't even look at the help. Water. Her voice emerged neutral, professionally flat. A small miracle given that her pulse was trying to exit through her throat. Please. Catalina didn't glance up from the menu. Vera poured. Her hand was steady. A competence born of repetition and the stubborn refusal to let fear win a fight she couldn't afford to lose. She moved around the table. 1 glass. 2. The bodyguard named Marco, whose face she remembered from security briefings that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. 3. Another bodyguard. Tomas, still wearing his shoulder holster like it was casual Friday. Then there was only 1 glass left. She could feel Damien the way certain materials feel heat, not gradually but all at once. The scent was the same, cedar and black tea and something underneath that had no name but belonged only to him. Her hand extended. Water arced into his glass in a controlled stream. Thank you. 2 words. That voice. The one that had promised her safety and permanence in the dark of their bedroom. The last night they'd been together, when she'd been 2 weeks pregnant and hadn't known it yet. You're my whole world, Vera. You know that, right? You're welcome. Almost done. Almost free. Almost. The baby kicked. Not a gentle nudge, but a sharp, targeted jab directly beneath her ribs that made her gasp, made her hand jerk, made water splash across the table and onto Damien's sleeve. I'm sorry, She grabbed napkins, reached across to blot the spill. Her pregnant belly bumped the table edge. Her face came up, and she met Damien Corsetti's eyes for the first time in 8 months. Recognition hit him like a structural failure. She watched it happen in real time, watched the polished indifference shatter, watched shock replace it with the subtlety of a detonation. His face went white, then red, then something beyond color. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist with the precision of a man who had spent his entire adult life seizing things before they could be taken from him. Vera. Her name left his mouth like a wound reopening. Damien. Catalina's voice, sharp with confusion. What's wrong? What are you? But he wasn't listening. His gaze had dropped to her belly, to the unmistakable architecture of advanced pregnancy beneath the stained uniform. And the expression that crossed his face was one she had never seen on him before. Not anger, not grief, but a devastation so total it seemed to reorganize his features around a single, unbearable revelation. His child. Their child. Growing inside a woman he'd buried. Let go. Vera pulled against his grip, her voice low. Please. You're hurting me. The word please broke through his paralysis. He released her so suddenly she stumbled backward. The water pitcher slipped from her grasp and shattered against the linoleum in an explosion of glass and liquid that silenced every conversation in the diner. I'm sorry. Her voice sounded distant, hollow. I'll clean. Outside. He was standing now, fluid and fast, every line of his body a declaration. Now. Damien, what the hell is going on? Catalina demanded. But he was already moving toward Vera with the focused intensity of a man who had decided that no piece of furniture, no person, no social convention would stand between him and whatever was about to happen next. 5 minutes, Jerry said from behind the counter, his voice tight with the particular anger of a man who knew when his waitress was in danger. Take it outside or I call the cops, and I don't care how expensive your suit is. Fine. Vera stripped off her apron, let it fall to the floor beside the shattered pitcher. 5 minutes. And that was when she learned that hiding from a man like him was never the hard part. The hard part was watching him find out the truth. The November wind hit her like a correction. The street was quiet, the particular quiet of neighborhoods where late-night sounds went uninvestigated. A black SUV idled at the curb, tinted windows reflecting the diner's dying neon. Damien's hand settled on her lower back. Possessive. Automatic. The muscle memory of a man who'd guided her through 1,000 doorways. Don't touch me. She pulled away, wrapping both arms around herself, around their son. He stopped. Under the sodium streetlight, he looked older than 36. Harder. New lines carved around a mouth that used to smile when they were alone. Shadows beneath eyes that confirmed what she'd already suspected. The man was not sleeping. Not 40 minutes. Not 20. Something had broken in his biology when she died, and it had not repaired itself. You're alive. He said it like someone testing the structural integrity of a sentence before building anything on top of it. 8 months. His breath made ghosts in the cold air. 8 goddamn months, and you're alive. Surprised. The bitterness rose before she could filter it. Sorry to interrupt the wedding plans. His hand came up, fast, and caught her chin. Not hard, but with the absolute precision of a man who needed physical confirmation that she was three-dimensional. His eyes were wild. Feral. The look of someone who had just watched physics violate its own rules. I buried you. The words came out shredded. I stood over a coffin with your name on it and put flowers on a grave every Sunday for 6 months, and I swore I would find the people responsible, and I would. And instead you got engaged. She pulled free. To a Giordano. Very strategic of you. That's business. A political arrangement too, he stopped. His gaze dropped to her belly again, and she watched something in his throat work, swallowing words or fury, or the kind of grief that doesn't have a name because it's too complicated to describe. Is it mine? The question landed like a physical blow. How dare you? How dare I? His voice climbed, jagged, raw, uncontrolled in a way she'd never heard before. You let me think you were dead. You disappeared without a word, and you're standing here 7 months pregnant in a parking lot behind a diner, and you want to talk about daring. 7.5. The correction stopped him cold. 7.5 months. Her hand pressed against the swell. It's a boy. And yes, he's yours. The only man I ever. She cut herself off, furious that the tears were starting. She had trained herself not to cry. Trained herself over 8 months of cold apartments and minimum wage shifts, and sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. But her body had its own memory, and it remembered what this man had once meant to her. Your cousin tried to kill me, Damien. She made her voice iron. Nico planted a bomb under my car. He forged documents, faked recordings, manufactured evidence that made it look like I was selling information to the Calabresi family. He set me up as the leak. 3 of your men died in that warehouse raid, and Nico made sure every piece of evidence pointed to me. Damien went still. The particular stillness of a large predator whose body had learned to stop all movement before doing something irreversible. Say that again. Nico. She forced herself to hold his gaze. Let him read every line, every shadow, every truth that 8 months of survival had burned into her face. He wanted your position. He figured if he got rid of me, destabilized you emotionally, he could stage a takeover. Make it look like you were weak, compromised by a traitor wife. That's impossible. Nico is. Family. I know. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a phone. Cheap, prepaid, the kind purchased with cash from a bodega on Pulaski. Her fingers found the screenshot she'd kept as her only insurance for 8 months. The text message that had arrived while she crouched in an alley 3 blocks from the explosion, her palms cut from climbing a chain-link fence, her ears still ringing. She held it out. Sorry about the car, cousin. Nothing personal, just business. Say hi to your wife for me. Oh wait, she's dead. My mistake. Damien took the phone. For a long moment he simply stared at the screen. Vera watched something happen behind his eyes, a restructuring. Every conversation, every kindness, every strategic suggestion Nico had offered over the last 8 months being re-examined through a lens that changed everything. When he looked up, his expression had hardened into something she recognized. The look he wore when decisions had already been made, and the only remaining question was logistics. Where is he now? At your right hand, I assume. She took the phone back, their fingers brushing. The contact sent a charge through her that she filed under things she couldn't afford to feel. I've been busy surviving. He helped me hold everything together. Damien's voice was barely audible. After the fire, he advised me on the Giordano alliance. He pushed the engagement. He said I needed to show strength, to move forward. Of course he did. He sat across from me every morning for 8 months. The words were coming out slowly now, as though each one had to be extracted. He brought flowers to your grave. He helped me write the eulogy. The image, Nico standing over her empty grave, arranging flowers, performing grief, made Vera's stomach turn. She pressed her hand to her belly and breathed until the nausea passed. Get in the car. No. Vera. I said no. She backed up a step. I've spent 8 months making decisions for myself. You don't walk back into my life and start issuing commands. You spent 8 months surviving on luck. He stepped closer, not threatening, but filling the space between them with a physical certainty she couldn't match. And luck runs out, Tesoro. You know it. I know it. And the moment I start investigating Nico, he's going to learn you're alive. When that happens, you need to be somewhere he can't reach. The endearment, Tesoro, my treasure, hit her like a blow to the chest. He hadn't called her that since the night before everything fell apart. The last night she'd spent in their bed, his hand on her hip, his voice quiet in the darkness. Don't call me that. Her voice cracked despite everything. You don't get to call me that. You're marrying someone else. I'm not marrying anyone. He said it with such flat certainty that she almost believed him. Catalina knows what the arrangement is. There's no love, no commitment beyond mutual strategic interest. And what am I? The secret you keep in a safe house while you play alliance politics with your Mafia princess. You're my wife. The words came out like a vow being renewed under gunfire. The mother of my child. The only person in 8 months who, he stopped. His jaw worked. You're my wife, Vera. That's not negotiable. The baby kicked twice. Hard. Casting a decisive vote. 3 hours, she said, hating herself for negotiating instead of running. You get 3 hours. Then I decide whether I stay or disappear. Something complicated moved across his face. Relief, fear, the particular anguish of being offered something you know can be taken away again. 3 hours. The penthouse occupied the 32nd floor of a building that didn't appear on any directory. No name on the lobby directory. No label on the mailbox. Just a biometric panel and a private elevator that opened into a space so aggressively luxurious it made Vera's teeth hurt. She stood in the center of the living room, Italian marble floor, furniture that looked like it had been selected by someone who understood that money was a language and every object in a room was a sentence, and felt the altitude change register in her inner ear. Not physically, existentially. 12 hours ago, her biggest concern had been whether she'd make enough in tips to cover the deposit on a second-hand crib she'd found at a Salvation Army on Western. Now she was standing on stone that cost more than her annual income, in a uniform that smelled like French fries and old grease, and the father of her child was making phone calls that would rearrange the power structure of a criminal organization. The disconnect was so severe it felt physical, like stepping off a curb and discovering the street was 3 feet lower than expected. Bedrooms through there. Damien was already pacing the perimeter, phone pressed to his ear, speaking Italian in the clipped cadence of a man redistributing assets and personnel across a city. Bathrooms stocked. There should be some clothes. Whose? He paused. The Italian stopped. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had just realized that certain answers were more dangerous than the questions that prompted them. The silence answered for him. Of course there were other women. Of course there were. He was Damien Corsetti, and she had been dead for 8 months, and men like him did not mourn by becoming celibate. She had no right to the jealousy that twisted through her chest like a wire tightening, no right and no defense against it. She turned away and walked to the window, pressed her forehead against glass that radiated November cold. 32 stories below, Chicago glittered with the assembled indifference of 4 million people who didn't participate in anyone's personal catastrophe. Behind her, she heard him end the call. Heard the particular quality of silence that meant he was standing still, watching her, trying to calculate the correct thing to say in a situation that had no precedent in his extensive catalog of difficult conversations. "When's the last time you slept?" she asked, watching his reflection in the glass. The question caught him. She saw the micro flinch, the way his hand stalled on the phone screen. "I sleep." "You don't." She turned to face him. "I can see it. The damage around your eyes. The tremor in your hands that wasn't there before. It's been 8 months of this." He set his phone down. For a moment the mask dropped. Not completely, never completely, but enough. Beneath the suit and the authority and the tactical mind capable of coordinating violence across a metropolitan area, she could see the exhaustion. It wasn't fatigue. It was structural. The kind of tiredness that had taken up permanent residence in his bones. Since the funeral, his voice was quiet. Stripped. 40 minutes. Sometimes an hour. Then I'm awake. Every night. Every single night for 8 months. You've seen doctors. 7. Plus 2 sleep clinics, a neurologist, a psychiatrist who prescribed enough medication to sedate a horse, and a hypnotherapist Marco found on the internet who charged $800 an hour and smelled like patchouli. He almost smiled. Almost. Nothing works. She thought of the man she'd married. The one who fell asleep with his arm across her waist, his breathing synchronizing with hers within minutes, his body relaxing into hers with the absolute trust of someone who had found the one place in the world where vigilance was unnecessary. Their bodies had learned each other's rhythms. His system had calibrated itself to her presence the way certain instruments calibrate to a reference tone. And then the reference tone disappeared, and the instrument couldn't find its frequency. "Eat something," she said. "I'll make it. Your kitchen probably has actual food. You don't have to. I've been feeding people for 8 months, Damien. It's the one thing I'm still good at." She found the kitchen. Marble counters. Professional-grade appliances. A refrigerator stocked by someone who understood that men like Damien didn't shop for themselves. She pulled out eggs, butter, bread, cheese. Simple things. The kind of meal you make at midnight when everything else has collapsed, and the only remaining act of sanity is to crack eggs into a pan and make sure someone eats. Damien sat at the island and watched her cook. Not with hunger, with something more complicated. Like he was memorizing the mechanical details of her movements, cataloging them against the possibility that she might evaporate. "The baby's healthy," she said without turning around. "I went to free clinics every month. False name. Cash. He's strong, good heartbeat, good growth, all the markers normal. Free clinics." He said it like the words contained broken glass. "It was the best I could do." "I know." A pause that carried the weight of everything he wanted to say and couldn't. "That's what makes it worse." She slid a plate of scrambled eggs and buttered toast across the island. Nothing elegant. The eggs were slightly overcooked. She'd always overcooked eggs, even when they'd had a chef and a kitchen that could have serviced a small restaurant. Damien had never mentioned it. Had eaten every plate she'd ever made him with the focused attention of a man who understood that the person who cooked for you was telling you something that couldn't be communicated any other way. He looked at the plate, then at her, and something raw and honest crossed his face. Not desire, not strategy, not the calculated vulnerability of a man who knew how to weaponize emotion, but the unguarded gratitude of someone who had been surviving on takeout and caffeine, and the particular emptiness of meals eaten alone in rooms designed for two. "Thank you." They ate in the particular silence of two people who had 8 months of words dammed up behind a wall that neither of them was ready to breach. Vera's exhaustion was catching up with her. Her feet throbbed. Her back ached. The baby had shifted into the slow, rolling rhythm that preceded sleep, gentle, rhythmic movements that felt like waves in a very small ocean. "He's quiet now," she said, pressing her hand to the spot where their son had finally concluded his evening athletics. "He kicks all day and sleeps at night. Like clockwork. The doctors at the clinic said his circadian rhythm is already established, which apparently is unusual this early." "What else?" Damien's voice was careful, almost shy, a quality she had never in 5 years of marriage associated with this man. He was leaning forward slightly, his fork forgotten, his entire being focused on information about a child he hadn't known existed 4 hours ago. "What else does he do?" "He hiccups." She smiled despite everything, despite the diner and the duffel bag and the woman's perfume in the closet. "Usually around 3 a.m. These tiny rhythmic jumps that feel like, I don't know, like someone tapping a message in Morse code from very far away. And he reacts to music. Not classical, which is supposedly what babies in utero are supposed to prefer. He likes the radio in the diner. The classic rock station that Jerry plays during the dinner rush. Springsteen makes him go crazy. Fleetwood Mac calms him down. He has taste. He has your taste. Which is exactly what I was afraid of." The joke landed somewhere between them. Fragile, tentative, small enough to hold in one hand. And for one moment, the 8 months contracted to nothing, and they were just two people expecting a child, sharing the small, astonishing details of a life they'd both made. "Have you thought about names?" he asked. "I was waiting." The admission cost her something. "It didn't feel right to choose without you. Even when I assumed we'd never." She stopped, pressed her hand against her belly. "I was waiting." Something moved behind his eyes. Not tears. Damien Corsetti did not cry in front of people. But the tectonic shift of a man whose emotional architecture had just been fundamentally revised by 6 words. "I was waiting for you." Then the moment passed, and the weight of everything else settled back into the spaces between them. "You need to rest," Damien said. "So do you." "I told you." "I don't." "Try." She stood, wincing as her back protested 8 months of inadequate mattresses. "You said 3 hours. Lie down for one of them. If you can't sleep, you can't sleep. But try." He studied her. Not the way he studied problems, strategically, looking for leverage, but the way he used to study her in the early years. As if she were a language he'd chosen to spend his life learning. "Okay." The bedroom was enormous. Vera crawled onto the bed without changing, too exhausted to care about the thread count or the fact that another woman's perfume lingered faintly in the closet. She lay on her side, one arm curved around her belly, and felt the baby resettle against the new position. Damien appeared in the doorway. His jacket was off, his tie removed. In his shirt sleeves, with his hair slightly disordered and the shadows under his eyes visible in the bedside light, he looked human. Approachable. Breakable in a way he never allowed himself to be in daylight. "Just," she exhaled. "Lie down. On top of the covers if you want. You don't have to do anything. Just be here." He crossed the room. Lay down on the other side of the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The space between them was measured, close enough to hear each other breathe, far enough to preserve the fiction that this was practical rather than desperate. Vera closed her eyes, let her breathing slow, felt the baby settle. 17 minutes. That was how long it took. She counted, not deliberately, but because her body had spent 8 months calibrating itself to danger. And the sound of another person's breathing changing was the kind of data she cataloged automatically now. At minute 4, his breathing was still shallow. Controlled. At minute 9, the rhythm began to lengthen. At minute 14, the tension left his shoulders. She could hear it, the subtle shift in how his weight distributed across the mattress. At minute 17, he was asleep. Not the shallow, interrupted dozing he'd described. Real sleep. The kind that softened the lines around his mouth and released the clench from his jaw and made him look, for the first time in 8 months, like the man she'd married rather than the monument he'd become. His hand lay between them, palm up, fingers slightly curled. As if reaching for something in the dark. Vera placed her hand against his. Carefully. The way you place a card on a table, testing whether the surface will hold. His fingers closed around hers. He didn't wake. She didn't know it yet, but she had just become the only evidence that could destroy his empire, or save it. She woke to gray dawn light and the sound of his voice, low, controlled Italian, coming from the other room. The space beside her was warm. He'd slept. 5 hours, maybe more, judging by the angle of light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The longest stretch he'd managed since the funeral. The baby was awake, conducting morning exercises against her ribs. "Your father slept last night," she whispered. "Because of us." A knock. Damien appeared in the doorway, phone at his ear, but his eyes went to her immediately, checking, verifying, confirming that the night hadn't been a hallucination born of desperate longing. "I need to handle some things." He covered the phone. "Marco's outside. Don't leave the apartment, Vera." "So I'm a prisoner." "You're protected. That's what men like you always say." "Men like me." He repeated it without inflection. "Men who lock doors and call it love." His jaw tightened. "Would you prefer the studio above the laundromat?" They stared at each other. 8 months compressed into a 3-second standoff. 3 hours, she reminded him. "The clock started when we walked in. The clock stopped when I slept." His expression was unreadable. "You know what that means. You know what you are to me." He was gone before she could answer, which was probably intentional, because she didn't have an answer, and they both knew it. Vera stood alone in the kitchen and unpacked the duffel bag Marco had retrieved from her apartment. Everything she owned fit inside it. 2 changes of maternity clothes, both from Target. A copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting with a Cracked Spine and Coffee Stains. 6 ultrasound photos in a Ziploc bag. A kitchen knife she'd been sleeping with. $340 in cash. A library card under a name that wasn't hers. She spread the ultrasound photos across the marble counter like a timeline of survival. For months. 5, 6, 7. Each one showing the baby growing larger, more definite, more undeniably real. The technician at the clinic on 26th Street had told her it was a boy at the 6-month mark, had pointed to the grainy evidence on the screen, and Vera had cried right there on the examination table, not from joy or sorrow, but from the overwhelming specificity of it. A son. Damien's son. Growing inside a woman who had to pay cash and give a false name just to confirm he was alive. She traced the outline of his head in the 7-month photo. He had his father's skull, broad, determined, built for confrontation. "We're going to be okay," she told him. She'd been saying it for 8 months. She was starting to believe it. The morning brought 3 things. First, Marco, who was built like an industrial refrigerator and spoke like a man who'd graduated from a curriculum that didn't appear in any educational database, delivered a second round of supplies. Groceries. Prenatal vitamins. A set of maternity clothes in her size that someone, Damien, she assumed, because no one else would have remembered she preferred dark blue, had purchased from a store that didn't leave receipts. He set everything down with the professional neutrality of someone whose job description spanned logistics, security, and the occasional disposal of problems that couldn't be solved through diplomacy, and withdrew without commentary. Second, Dr. Castellano, a woman in her 50s with surgeon's hands and the bedside manner of someone who had spent 3 decades keeping inconvenient medical information private. She arrived with a portable ultrasound unit, examined Vera with thorough efficiency, and declared both mother and baby healthy, if nutritionally compromised. You need to gain 5 pounds before delivery, the doctor said, writing prescriptions on a pad with no letterhead. Protein, iron, leafy greens. And sleep. Real sleep. Not the hypervigilant half-rest of someone who's been running. Your cortisol levels are elevated. The baby can feel that. I know. Vera watched the ultrasound screen where her son was currently performing what looked like a slow-motion somersault. I'll work on it. Also, the doctor paused, her expression shifting from clinical to something more personal. He asked me to tell you that he slept 5 hours last night. He wanted you to know. She didn't elaborate on who he was. She didn't need to. Vera pressed her hand to her belly and said nothing. Third, Catalina Giordano. She arrived unannounced at 11 a.m., passing through the building's biometric security with the ease of someone whose access codes hadn't been revoked. An oversight, or possibly a deliberate choice by a man who was juggling more variables than any human mind should attempt simultaneously. Vera was eating the toast Dr. Castellano had prescribed when the elevator opened, and the woman who was engaged to her husband walked in wearing heels that could puncture Kevlar. So, Catalina surveyed the apartment. The duffel bag by the bedroom door, the prenatal vitamins on the counter, the row of ultrasound photos Vera had left on the kitchen island like a hand of cards. The dead wife. The fiancé. They regarded each other the way two people regard a chess board they've both been studying in private, with respect for the opponent's intelligence and absolute clarity about the stakes. I'm not here to threaten you, Catalina said, moving to the window. She stood exactly where Vera had stood last night, looking out at the same view. I'm here because I know about Nico. Vera set down her toast. What do you know? That he moved money through shell companies registered in 4 countries. That he met with the Calabresi family 6 times in the last year without authorization or documentation. That the financial architecture behind your supposed death has inconsistencies that only make sense if someone inside Damien's inner circle was directing the operation from the beginning. Catalina turned. Her eyes were intelligent, calculating, and completely devoid of the performative warmth that most people used as social lubrication. I've been investigating him for 3 months. And you didn't tell Damien. Tell him what? The laugh was dry, precise, surgical. That I suspected his lifelong confidant, the man who was best man at your wedding, the man who helped write your eulogy, of high treason, based on some unusual wire transfers and a feeling I couldn't quite articulate. He would have investigated, clumsily because he's too close to it, and Nico would have vanished the evidence, eliminated any witnesses, and we'd have nothing. So you kept quiet while my husband grieved a wife who was alive. I kept quiet while I built a case that could survive scrutiny. No apology. No softening. Now you're here, alive, pregnant, and carrying testimony that transforms my financial evidence into a conviction the council cannot ignore. Your survival is the piece I didn't have. And what do you want out of this? The same thing I've always wanted. A strategic alliance with the Corsetti organization that serves both families. Catalina set an envelope on the counter between the ultrasound photos and the prenatal vitamins. The engagement was never about love. Love is an indulgence that people in our position cannot afford. But partnerships built on shared intelligence, mutual capability, and aligned interests, those survive. Vera studied her. This woman who had spent 3 months conducting a covert investigation inside a criminal organization while simultaneously maintaining a convincing performance as a dutiful fiancé. She wanted to hate her. The poise, the calculation, the flawless surface that admitted nothing soft. But the envelope on the counter represented 3 months of dangerous, methodical work on behalf of a woman Catalina had never met. Work that could have gotten her killed if Nico had discovered it. And that was more than anyone else in Damien's entire world had done. We present to the council tomorrow morning, Catalina said, moving toward the elevator. 9 a.m. at Russo's place. Have your testimony prepared. Every detail, the bomb timeline, the text message, the forged evidence, the alley where you hid, the cash you used, the clinics you visited. We get one chance at this. If Nico survives tomorrow, he won't make the same mistake twice. And if he finds out before tomorrow, he won't. Catalina paused at the elevator, and for the first time, something human flickered behind the diplomatic mask. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. Because Damien is with him right now, sitting across a conference table, reviewing shipping schedules. Smiling. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. Your husband is a better actor than either of us expected. The doors closed. Vera stood alone in the kitchen, one hand on her belly where her son was doing his afternoon kick routine, the other pressing the 7-month ultrasound flat against the marble counter. "Tomorrow," she said. "We just need to hold on until tomorrow." What happened next, no one predicted, least of all her. Damien returned at 6 p.m., looking like a man who had spent 9 hours holding a live grenade with the pin pulled. He set his phone on the counter, loosened his tie with the mechanical precision of someone undoing a noose, and stood in the kitchen doorway watching Vera stir spaghetti sauce from a can. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up. "I sat across from the man who tried to murder my wife and my unborn son." His hands hung at his sides, fists flexing and releasing in a rhythm that matched nothing. I smiled at his jokes. I reviewed quarterly projections. I discussed spring wedding venues while Marco compiled evidence that will end him. "Are you okay?" "No." The word was clean. Honest. Stripped of every defense he wore for the world outside this room. "I'm not. And I won't be until this is over." She set a plate of spaghetti in front of him. Nothing sophisticated, canned sauce, dried pasta. The kind of meal that existed as function rather than art. He ate it with the focus of a man who had not tasted anything real in 8 months. "Catalina was here," Vera said. He stopped chewing, set down the fork, waited. "She told me about her investigation. The shell companies, the unauthorized contacts. She wants to present jointly to the council tomorrow." "I know. I reviewed her files this afternoon." He picked up the fork again but didn't eat. "She's thorough. If we combine her financial forensics with your testimony and the text, Nico has no defense. And after? I handle it." The flatness in his voice meant precisely what she thought it meant. "Damien." She waited until he looked at her. "I know what handle it means in your vocabulary, and I'm not asking you to change who you are. But I need you to hear me when I say this. Our son is going to be born in 5 weeks. Whatever you do tomorrow, whatever the council decides, I need you to come home. I always come home. You always came home before." She set her fork down. "Before, there was no one waiting. A house isn't the same as a home, and an obligation isn't the same as someone who needs you alive and whole and present. I need you alive, Damien. Not as a symbol or a title or a strategic asset. As a person who holds his son and sleeps next to his wife and does all the ordinary, unremarkable things that men like you think don't matter, but are actually the entire point." He was quiet for a long time. The spaghetti cooled between them. "Okay," he said finally. The word was small and enormous at the same time. "Okay." They finished dinner. Vera washed the dishes. Muscle memory from 8 months of closing shifts where Jerry expected every surface spotless before anyone went home. And Damien dried, standing close enough that their arms brushed occasionally. Each contact sent a current through her nervous system that she catalogued and did nothing about. The domesticity of it. 2 people in a kitchen splitting labor, not speaking, felt more intimate than any conversation they'd had since the diner. As if the silence itself was a form of communication. "I'm here. You're here. This is enough." "You slept last night," she said, handing him the last plate. His hands stilled. 5 hours and 11 minutes. The precision surprised her. "You counted. Every second I was awake, I was afraid that if I fell asleep, I'd wake up and you'd be gone." He set the plate down carefully. "So I counted the time between closing my eyes and losing consciousness. 17 minutes. And then I slept for 5 hours and 11 minutes without waking once. The longest I've slept since April. It's because I was there. I know. It was like that before. When we were married. You always slept better with you beside me. The specialists couldn't explain it. They tested serotonin levels, melatonin cycles, cortisol patterns. Every metric came back inconclusive. Medically, there's no reason your presence should affect my sleep architecture." He turned to face her. "But it does. It always has. And when you died, when I thought you died, whatever mechanism your presence activated just stopped." "Damien, I'm not saying this to guilt you." His voice was careful now. "I'm saying it because you need to understand something. When I tell you I can't lose you again, it's not rhetoric. It's not possessiveness. It's the medical fact that without you, my body doesn't know how to rest." The admission broke something open in her chest that she had spent 8 months sealing shut. She stepped forward, closing the distance she'd been maintaining since the diner, and pressed her palm flat against his chest. His heart beat under her fingers, strong, slightly too fast, alive. "I'm not gone. You might be. After tomorrow. After Nico is dealt with and the danger is resolved, you might take our son and disappear again." His hand came up, covering hers. You might decide that this world, my world, isn't worth the cost. And I would spend every night for the rest of my life counting minutes of sleep that never came. Damien, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. He bent his head until his forehead touched hers. I'm asking you to know. She kissed him. Not gently. There was nothing gentle left between them, but with the compressed urgency of 8 months of believing it impossible. His hands found her face, her waist, the curve of her belly where their sun kicked once, sharply, as if startled or approving or simply registering the seismic change in his mother's heart rate. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Vera pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his heart rate against her temple. Slowing, steadying, calibrating to her presence the way it always had. The way certain frequencies find each other across noise and distance and interference. The way radio towers, she thought absurdly, locate their signal. The engagement, she said into his shoulder. What happens to the Giordano alliance? Catalina and I discussed it this afternoon. His hand moved slowly across her back. Not strategic, not seductive, just the motion of a man relearning the geography of someone he'd thought was gone. The engagement is dissolved. The alliance stays. She gets a seat on the advisory council, which is what she actually wanted. I get my wife back, which is, his voice caught. Just slightly. Just enough. Which is what I wanted. You didn't know I was alive this afternoon. No. But I knew I wasn't marrying her. I knew that the moment I saw you in that diner. He pulled back enough to look at her. Everything else is logistics. Take me to bed, she said. And I mean actually to bed. You need to sleep. I need to sleep. And our son needs both his parents rested for what's coming. They lay down together for the second time. Properly. Under the covers. His arm settled across her waist with the precision of something clicking into its designated position. Her back pressed against his chest. The baby, sensing the arrangement, executed a single slow roll and then went still, an endorsement, or at minimum, an absence of objection. In the darkness, she could feel Damien's breathing begin to change. The shallow, guarded rhythm of a man who had spent 8 months fighting sleep was giving way, incrementally, to something deeper. His arm relaxed. His jaw unclenched. The tremor in his hand, the one she'd noticed in the diner, the one that 8 months of sleeplessness had installed as a permanent feature, went quiet against her belly. Damien fell asleep in 11 minutes. Vera counted every one. Not from anxiety this time, from something closer to wonder. The mechanical precision of it. The way his body surrendered specifically and exclusively in her presence. As if her proximity operated some switch that no pharmaceutical, no therapy, no amount of money or power or authority could locate. 11 minutes. And then peace. She woke before him for the second time. 5:40 a.m. The room was still dark, the city outside the windows a map of streetlights and early traffic. Today was the council. Damien was still asleep beside her. Truly asleep, deeply asleep, his breathing the slow, even cadence of a body that had finally received permission to rest. His arm was still across her waist. His hand, even in sleep, had found its way to her belly, palm flat against the spot where their son was just beginning his morning routine. She studied his face in the pre-dawn gray. The lines that 8 months of insomnia had carved into his skin were already softening. Not gone, not by a long way, but less severe. As if his body was recalibrating in real time now that the variable it needed had been restored. 7 specialists. 2 sleep clinics. A neurologist. A hypnotherapist who smelled like patchouli. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical intervention. And the solution turned out to be a woman in a stained diner uniform who made overcooked eggs and lay down beside him without being asked. She didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't know how to metabolize the fact that her presence was medically the only thing that allowed this man to function. That without her, his body had slowly been destroying itself through deprivation, and that the destruction would resume the moment she left. It was, she realized, the most sophisticated trap anyone had ever built for her. Not a locked door. Not a guarded building. Not the biometric panels, or the armed men in hallways. Just the simple, devastating fact that if she walked away, he would stop sleeping and eventually it would kill him. And she would know. For the rest of her life, she would know. Stop thinking. His voice was rough with sleep, his eyes still closed. I can hear it. You can't hear thinking. I can hear yours. His arm tightened fractionally. Your breathing changes. We have the council in 3 hours. I know. He opened his eyes. In the gray morning light, they were almost silver. Are you ready? I've been ready for 8 months. I just didn't know what I was ready for. He sat up slowly, and she watched the transition happen. The softness leaving his face, the authority reassembling itself, the mask going back on piece by piece. By the time he was on his feet, he was Damien Corsetti again. The version the world saw. The version that made men step aside in doorways and lower their voices in corridors. But she had seen the other version. The one that fell asleep in 17 minutes with his hand on her belly. And she would not forget it. The council chamber occupied the back room of a restaurant on Taylor Street that served as neutral territory for business that couldn't be discussed within earshot of civilians or recording devices. The front room sold excellent cannoli to the public. The back room sold justice to people who didn't trust courts. 6 men sat around an oak table that had been in that room for 40 years. Their combined age exceeded 4 centuries. Their combined history was the kind of thing that kept federal prosecutors awake at night. Vera sat at one end in a borrowed dress, navy blue, fitted enough to be serious, cut wide enough to accommodate 7.5 months of pregnancy. Her hands were steady on the table. Her pulse was not, but 8 months of performing normalcy, while terrified, had turned her into an exceptional actress. Beside her, Catalina Giordano held a tablet loaded with 3 months of financial forensics. She wore a charcoal suit, and no jewelry except a watch that probably cost more than the restaurant. Her expression was the controlled blankness of someone presenting a quarterly earnings report rather than a case for execution. Damien stood behind Vera's chair. Not beside her. Behind her. One hand on the chair back, close enough to touch her shoulder, but deliberately not touching. The positioning was calculated. She understood that without being told. He was presenting her not as a wife to be protected, not as a victim to be pitted, but as a witness to be weighed and believed on her own merit. Nico Corsetti sat across the table, flanked by council guards who belonged to Russo, not to either cousin. His suit was pristine. His composure was not, though you had to know where to look. Vera did. She could see the twitch in his left hand, the way he held his jaw slightly too tight, the way his eyes cut to the door every 30 seconds as if calculating distance and odds. She held his gaze across the table. Didn't look away. She wanted him to see exactly what she was. Not a ghost, not a victim, not a woman who had spent 8 months running, but proof. Living, breathing, 7.5 months pregnant proof of what he had done. You understand why you've been summoned. Angelo Russo spoke first. His voice was the sound of old stone being moved. I understand my cousin has made accusations. Nico's tone was measured, reasonable, performatively aggrieved. Based on the testimony of a woman who faked her own death for 8 months and hid from the family she claims to love. You'll forgive me if I question the credibility of a ghost. I didn't fake anything. Vera's voice came out clear and level. She felt Damien's knuckle brush her shoulder blade. Once. Steady. Your bomb did the faking. I just survived it. The room shifted. Imperceptibly, a redistribution of attention, 6 pairs of old, shrewd eyes recalibrating their assessment of the pregnant woman at the end of the table. What followed was the most disciplined 2 hours of her life. She testified. Described in precise, clinical detail opening her car door at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March and seeing the device wired to the ignition, crude, effective, the kind of bomb designed to vaporize the vehicle and anyone inside it. Described the digital timer, 3 minutes. Described the decision, 180 seconds to choose between getting in and dying or running and giving up everything she knew. Described the alley where she hid, 3 blocks from the warehouse, her palms sliced from the chain-link fence, listening to the explosion that ended her previous life. And then the text. She read it aloud, each word landing in the silent room like a dropped stone. Sorry about the car, cousin. Nothing personal, just business. Say hi to your wife for me. Oh wait, she's dead. My mistake. Nico's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Catalina presented the financial architecture next. Shell companies routing money through 8 offshore jurisdictions. 6 unauthorized meetings with the Calibrating family, documented through surveillance photographs and cellular tower pings. Payments to a demolition specialist whose professional expertise extended well beyond commercial buildings. Every transaction time-stamped, cross-referenced, and contextualized within a pattern that pointed to one conclusion. Marco testified to the chain of custody on the evidence. Dr. Castellano provided medical records establishing the pregnancy timeline, proving that Vera had been carrying Damien's child when the bomb was planted, which elevated the charge from conspiracy to attempted murder of a bloodline member's heir. Nico's composure eroded one exhibit at a time. Vera watched it happen the way you watch paint being stripped from a wall, layer by layer, each one revealing something rawer and less presentable beneath. The rehearsed indignation gave way to strategic calculation, then to something approaching genuine fear. "Anything you wish to say?" Russo asked when the evidence had been laid out in its totality. Nico surveyed the table, found only settled verdicts behind every face. When he spoke, the polish was gone, and what remained was the bitter honesty of a man who knew he was already dead and had decided to spend his last words making a philosophical argument. He married for love. In our world, that's a vulnerability. Someone had to be prepared for what happens when sentiment overrides judgment. "So you tried to murder a pregnant woman," Salvatore Duca said very quietly, to correct a leadership philosophy. The vote was unanimous. 6 hands. No dissent. Vera didn't watch what happened after Nico was taken from the room. She didn't need to. She heard the door close behind him, heard the particular quality of silence that follows irreversible decisions, and then Damien's hand, the hand that would execute that decision before the day was over, settled on her shoulder with a gentleness that made something behind her sternum crack. "It's finished," he said. She placed her hand over his. "Almost." The baby came 3 weeks later. Not in a war zone. Not surrounded by violence. In a hospital room with clean sheets and proper equipment, and a doctor who had delivered 300 babies before this one and treated the event with the professional calm it deserved. The labor lasted 14 hours, which Dr. Castellano said was normal for a first birth, but which felt to Vera like a single, sustained act of willpower that drew on reserves she hadn't known she possessed. Damien was beside her the entire time. Not pacing, not panicking, not performing the theatrical helplessness that movies assign to expectant fathers. He held her hand. He counted through contractions with her. He pressed cold cloths to her forehead and fed her ice chips, and in the final hour, when the pain became something beyond language, he simply held her gaze and didn't look away. "I've got you," he said. Not a promise. A fact. The same tone he used for things that had already been decided. Marcus Damien Corsetti arrived at 4:47 a.m. on a December Tuesday, small and furious, and declaring his existence with a cry that was disproportionate to his size. 5 pounds, 2 ounces. Dark eyes that would eventually settle into his father's gray but were, for now, the universal newborn black of a person who hadn't yet decided what color the world deserved. Lungs that the neonatal team confirmed were functioning at a level that surprised everyone given his prematurity. Damien held him for the first time with hands that had done terrible things and were now, impossibly, cradling something so small that the bones of this child's skull fit entirely inside one palm. He held him the way you hold a document that could change history, carefully, with full awareness of what you were responsible for. The expression on his face, Vera would remember it when everything else about this year had faded. When the diner and the chain-link fence and the smell of the warehouse fire had become abstractions. She would remember this, wonder, terror, a complete recalibration of what mattered, as if every piece of territory, every alliance, every strategic calculation he'd ever performed had just been rendered irrelevant by 5 pounds of person who couldn't yet focus his eyes, but had already, in 60 seconds of existence, reorganized his father's entire value system. "He's perfect," Damien said, his voice wrecked. "He's absolutely." Marcus yawned, conclusively. His tiny fists uncurled and then curled again, as if testing the structural integrity of the world he'd just been introduced to and finding it, on balance, acceptable. And then he fell asleep in his father's arms with the absolute commitment of a child who had decided, based on the available evidence, that this particular set of hands was a reliable surface. Damien looked at Vera. His eyes were wet. He made no effort to conceal it, which was itself a revolution. Damien Corsetti, who had spent his adult life ensuring that no vulnerability was ever visible to anyone, standing in a hospital room with tears on his face and his sleeping son in his arms and no interest whatsoever in pretending otherwise. "He sleeps," he said, and she understood that he wasn't talking about the baby. He was talking about himself, about the 17 minutes and the 5 hours and the 11 minutes and every night since, about the fact that his body had finally fully remembered how to rest because the 2 people it needed were both in the room. "He sleeps," she confirmed. "And so do you. And so will I. Because it's over, Damien. The running. The hiding. The counting minutes in the dark. All of it." He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. Gently, with the particular care of a man who understood that some moments were too important to rush. Then to the baby's head, where the downy hair was already showing signs of the stubborn thickness that characterized every Corsetti male back to the old country. His hand found hers on the hospital blanket, and his fingers closed around hers the way they had on that first night in the penthouse, carefully testing whether the surface would hold. It held. Some men can't sleep because of guilt. Others because someone took the only peace they'd ever known. And then there was Damien Corsetti, who hadn't slept in 8 months. Not until a woman he'd buried walked back into his life smelling of diner grease and carrying his son, made him scrambled eggs at midnight, and lay down beside him in a bed that could have belonged to anyone but became, for 17 minutes and then for the rest of his life, the only place where his body remembered what peace felt like. He slept now. Every night. Her hand in his. Their son breathing in the bassinet 3 feet away. The city below them dark and indifferent, and no longer his problem. He slept, and he did not dream of fire. If that kept you, the 17 minutes, the 5 hours, the moment when their breathing matched and his body remembered how to rest, then you already know why some stories aren't really about the danger. They're about what you refuse to lose. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.